Welcome to the C-Suite Mentor, the place where you will learn the tools, strategies, and mindset to scale your business sustainably and build a lasting legacy. I'm your host, Theresa Cantley. As a fellow CEO, I understand what it takes to scale a business to 7 and multiple 8 figures. It's not necessarily what you might think. It requires a complete shift in how you think, strategize, and execute key actions in your business. My mission is to help CEOs step back into the driver's seat of their business by optimizing their operations, empowering their team, and staying in total alignment with their big vision. So, are you ready to exchange everything that hasn't worked for strategies that will? You're in the right place, so let's go. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the C-Suite Mentor podcast. Today, we are focused on a phrase that you probably have heard. You can't lead people to a place you aren't willing to lead yourself. And I'm going to talk about a story that I have not talked about ever. And in fact, I forgot about it. It's a story that happened to me when I was a leader in a business, when I was in corporate. I call it corporate. My husband says it was just a big, small business. It was a $90 million business, but whatever. That's besides the point. But and I think I blocked this story, and it only recently surfaced because, as you all know, I am writing a book. My book is on leadership, and I have a lot of stories in there of my own experiences dealing with the really good, bad, and really ugly of leadership and of business. And someone had told me that when you're writing a book, that you go through these periods where it's very cathartic, it's very healing, it's very therapeutic. Like, you remember things, you go through stuff, like stuff surfaces. And I'll tell you what, it is so true. So true. And I was working on actually kind of redeveloping the framework for my book and stories that I wanted to incorporate and things that I wanted to do. And I was working, we had a session with my writing coach, and I was having a conversation with her about story arc and about just relaying stuff out. And it was like 2 days later, this story pops into my head, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to write this down. And you'll see why it's so important. But it really, really goes back to, if you aren't willing to be the change, if you aren't willing to be better, to really focus on leading better and just being better. This is why personal development and business and leadership, it has to go hand in hand. It absolutely has to go hand in hand. And asking yourself that question, am I being better? Am I doing better at life? Am I doing better at being me? Am I being the best version of me every day? But the gentleman that I worked for definitely did not ask themselves that question. We're just going to put that out there, okay? They did not ask, am I being better? Am I doing better? Wasn't top of mind with them. So, and you'll find out why. But this story about my first introduction to a business coach came up, and I'm going to explain why they decided to hire a business coach. And I'm not quite sure what rock this guy crawled out from underneath, but what I know now, being a business coach and working with lots of businesses over the years, I'm not really sure why this guy ever considered himself a business coach. But this was back in, I think it was 2009. I was trying to remember when they hired him and what this looked like. But the business owners that we worked for, so we had the owners of the business with one primary owner. He was the president. And then and they were all men. And then we had next level leadership, or the leaders, I could say, in the business. And we were all women. Okay. So there's your one challenge. So the business owners themselves, they were gentlemen who had worked for the original owner, and then over the years ended up having discussions about partnership, and then became partners in the business, and then ended up buying the business. And they were always focused. And if you could draw a definition of traditional leadership, thinking you need to be a certain way, thinking you need to focus on certain things, that when you look at today's world and what we really need to focus on, like they were the definition of old school leadership, old school white male leadership. No offense to any white males that are out there, but they were very much focused on in order to grow the business, they wanted to acquire new territory. Who can we buy? They were focused on top line revenue. They were heavily focused on how can we make ourselves more money and not necessarily focused on how can we develop our people. The broken method of defining employee worth that I talk about, which is how much are you willing to sacrifice for the business? How much time are you willing to give up personally and put it towards the business? And then that will determine your worth. How much money will you make the business? And that will determine your worth. So that was what they focused heavily on. Let's just say that. And being someone who was, I think I was in my late 20s, I was trying to figure out like, how old was I? Who had, I started off, I was a director of operations there, and I became the director. I built a marketing department from scratch and then ran marketing and operations for the business. And oftentimes when I had ideas, new ideas, things that really challenged the norm, I was often faced with, well, that's the dumbest idea I ever heard. Or why would you even recommend that? Or why would you suggest that? That's silly. We would never do that. So there was a lot of friction there. Let's just say that. And again, they focused heavily on top line revenue. Top line revenue, if they focused on bottom line, the bottom line number, the bottom line, what was the net income? It was solely to see how much were we going to pay ourselves out. All right. We did have a bonus plan in place, but there was a lot tied to it that, again, it came down to how much are you willing to sacrifice for the business? How much time are you willing to sacrifice? How much time are you willing to be here? How much work are you willing to do? And then we'll talk about your bonus. So we had these owners of the business and we had these next level leaders, which I was one of them. And there was a lot of friction because the next level leaders, people who believed in, an employee's worth came from who they were inside. People who believed in what can we do to develop our people? What can we do to take care of our people? What can we do, when we look at growth, how can we try new things? How can we, really push the norm of what we've always done? Like, how can we do that? And that was always met with resistance. So there was a lot of friction between the next level leadership and the owners of the business. The owners of the business also weren't really in tune with process and procedure and really the right way to do things, the right way, which would be an ethical way. So oftentimes when we recommended to do stuff which followed the right way to do something, that was met with a lot of resistance. So you can see there was a lot of friction, especially when it came to pushing the norm, like pushing outside the boundaries, doing things to focus on change and growth and really focusing on internal growth. How can I develop? I know for me, anytime I asked to learn something new, I always had to teach myself how to do it. And at the time I was like, oh man, this really stinks because I would love a mentor. I would love to have somebody teach me how to do this. And I couldn't get that. So then I ended up having to teach myself. So I became my own mentor. And really my business partner who also worked with me, and she was one of the other leaders, she was really my first mentor and the first person who taught me, like, if you aren't willing to do it yourself, if you aren't willing to lead yourself somewhere, then don't expect other people to do it either. Or if you aren't willing to change, if you aren't willing to grow from the inside out, then we can't expect other people to do it either. And you can't expect miracles and all these positive shifts to happen because you're not making that change yourself. So anyway, so there was a lot of friction going on. There was a lot of frustration. You could feel it. I mean, you'd walk into the office and it felt like you could just cut the The air, you could just cut it. It was so heavy and thick and just constantly running into a lot of headbutting. And honestly, from our standpoint, from the next level leadership standpoint, I would say like mid-level managers, whatever you wanted to call us, we were just pushing against what was being done that was incorrect. We were pushing against that to do what really should have been done and what was ethically right. So he, the one owner, he's at a meeting, he sees this business coach, and the business coach does this whole spiel on how if you're struggling in your organization to achieve, to really scale your business and to grow your business and to 10x your revenue, I think is the phrase that he used. If you're looking to do that and you're running into problems and you can't get your team on board, I'm your person. And he hires him. And in those days, what he paid him was astronomical, which, I mean, I look back at it and I can't even believe we paid it. But so he announces that he hired this business coach and we're going on this retreat. And the idea behind this was to really bring together the owners, the partners of the business, and the leaders in the business so that we could really like move forward together. Yay. So we go to this retreat and it's offsite. And this, like I said, we had our first exposure to this business coach who really wasn't a business coach. But we sit down and we're talking about the problems in the business and where are the problems. And it's, well, every time I want to do something, you argue with it. That's what the owners were saying to us. And every time we want to do this, you always tell us it's not going to work. Or it takes us forever to implement something because you always poke holes at it. And so the activity that he had us do after we went through the things that weren't working is he had us do this activity that had to do with file dumping. And basically what it was each person had a chance to tell each one of the other people, and each person had to tell all of the other people in the room what was frustrating about them, what they didn't do right, where they thought there was friction, if they wanted to, what were the things that were good about them, and what they needed from them. So being a business coach now, I would not have necessarily done something like this because it does. And if you're going to have a conversation, a direct conversation, it needs to be a positive dialogue. There needs to be dialogue. So when we did this activity, it was one way. So the person dumped their file, basically, is what it was. And it was how they explained it was a file was all of these frustrations and experiences and stories that kind of built up and you put away and you didn't address it right away, which is mistake number one. You didn't address it. You just kept putting it in this file and filing it away. Well, now it was time to clean out the file. That was how he explained it. And I don't know, maybe there's still business coaches out there that still do this, but it is an activity that I do not recommend at all. So we go around the room, and as you can imagine, people are dumping files. And I mean, like 10 years worth of files are being dumped, and people are saying things to the other person that are hurtful, that are harmful, that are just very destructive. And the thing, here's the caveat to all of this, is that during this activity, when someone is saying this to you and dumping their file, you are not allowed to counteract it. You are not allowed to have a rebuttal. The only thing you're allowed to do is sit there and look at them and say, I understand. I understand. I'm sorry you feel that way. I understand. So as a leader, we're going to flip back. As a leader, as an empathetic leader, yes, you want to give people a safe space. This was not a safe space. You want to give people a safe space to be able to say what they need to say. And you can acknowledge, I hear you. I am sorry that you feel this way. But then there needs to be that dialogue, that conscious dialogue to then come to a resolution or help them to see things, maybe see things differently, or have you see things differently. Whatever it is, there needs to be that conscious dialogue to enable, and again, a safe space. With this exercise, there was no conscious dialogue back and forth, and this was not a safe space. What their goal was, the partners, their goal is that they thought that this retreat and that everything would bring everybody back together, that it would repair the frustration and repair the wrongdoings that had happened. But what happened was it did the exact opposite, because the wrongdoing they felt or thought or believed or whatever it was all of the wrongdoing came from the mid-level managers, the leaders in the business. They weren't willing to see themselves clearly or to even open up and understand what they were doing wrong or how they were contributing to the problems in the organization. So what this actually did, because I remember talking to my business partner about, the whole thing, and because at the end of the retreat, I was like, okay, there might be something wrong with me. I mean, I'm a pretty aware person. I'm pretty conscious, but this didn't feel right. This didn't really feel good at all. And in fact, this business coach, he was very, very male chauvinistic. He was very derogatory. He was horrible. And I was the one that had to handle a lot of the admin work, and he was horrible to me. And at the time, nobody did anything about it except all of the mid-level leaders, the other women that were in the same, boat as me. So, but I will say this. When I look back, and this is what came up for me, is number one, it was my first exposure to a business coach and what a business coach should not be. Number two, it really helped me to see that because I was young. I was, like I said, I think I was in my late 20s, early 30s, maybe early 30s. It helped me to see really what bad leadership was. It also helped me to realize that I was actually putting my value on whether or not these owners accepted me, or how much work I was willing. If I was making them money, then they would praise me and then I would feel better. And what I realized is that also about myself, after I realized I was a total people pleaser, that I was putting my value in the wrong places, which years later had to really do a lot of work around letting that go. But I also realized in that moment that I needed as myself, needed to think and be and act better. I needed to shift my belief about what was possible for me, not based on whether or not they accepted me, but based on what I believed about me. And even though these files were dumped about me, about how, I always took things personally, which is like the worst thing that you can tell an empath, or I always, I always felt like it was my fault if something didn't go right. And it was a lot to take in, a lot. And when I look back, I think to myself, dealing with those leaders who were not aware, who pushed the blame on this, them, that, versus looking at themselves and saying, you know what, change starts with me. I'm the one that needs to change. And looking back at that and realizing it in the present, it made me also realize, number one, I was stronger than I thought, even back then. But also, number two, this is a systemic leadership problem where leaders want to just place blame on it's their fault, it's the economy's fault, it's this employee isn't performing well. I deal with this a lot in businesses that I run, where managers will come to me and say, oh, this person, like, they're not doing their job well. They're not doing things correctly. Okay, well, what have you done to train them? Well, I really haven't spent any time with them. Okay, well, then I blame you, right? So I looked back as awful as this business coach was, I look back and I say, there was just they weren't willing to have the change start with them. People talk about pivot and change, pivot and change, pivot and change. It's like a catchphrase now. But that pivot and change needs to start with you. As I look back, we were willing to change as those middle-level managers, but the owners, the CEO, the president, and the vice presidents were not willing to change from the inside out. I think maybe one, just like a little tiny half an inch. But looking back at that, it was a matter of, number one, then the mid-level managers, the leaders, I'm gonna say, in the business, we then knew that we needed to pull together, and we then knew that it wasn't even just about leading, like, we really needed to kind of shield ourselves just to survive and to protect ourselves based on whatever aftermath was gonna come after the dealings with this business coach. And just so you know, spoiler alert, they ended up firing the business coach because this guy started down a crazy road and he said something that insulted one of the partners. And because he insulted one of the partners, then they got rid of him. Crazy, right? So, like I said, their plan with the whole thing actually backfired because in that moment when Vanessa and I sat down and we were talking about kind of what happened and how toxic this leadership was and what needed to happen next. And it really, for us, it fueled us to really put plans in place to get our business that we had literally just started off the ground and get us out of there. And it took a little bit, but that really fueled us because we thought there is no way we are going to go through 5, 10, 15 more years dealing with this toxic leadership. Because not only, from the external piece of it, not only does it break down like your sense of worth, but also like your work products started to suffer. People were frustrated because then what they wanted to do is they wanted to take this whole file dumping method and they actually then had us sit in a meeting with all of the employees and go through this whole file dump. And that took the hurt and the frustration and that toxic aftermath that happened with us and the partners in the retreat we were on, and it magnified it because now they had us doing it with the staff. So what they thought they were doing to repair the culture actually took it and made it even worse. So, and it was up to us, the next level leaders in the business, to really then say, okay, what do we need to do to kind of do some damage control, but also what do we need to do to protect ourselves? And as I said, what it really came down to was they did not want to admit that the problems in the organization really were them. That the change that they were looking for it wasn't about acquiring another business. It wasn't about adding another 20 million to the revenue. It wasn't about bringing on a new product line. It wasn't about doing more marketing or pushing the sales reps even further. It had nothing to do with that. What it had to do with is them being better as owners, as a CEO, as vice presidents. It required them changing the way that they saw themselves. I mean, we had nicknames for each one of them, which I won't go into right now, but I mean, one of them was a massive dictator. One of them was a massive micromanager. And their behaviors actually magnified after that event and after dealing with that business coach, which, as I said, it was supposed to do the exact opposite. So I heard a phrase, and this is again why it like kind of came up as far as this whole story and how you can actually, if you are not willing to change as a leader, if you are not willing to be the change. And this is why personal development has to go hand in hand with leadership and business, because there's so much in personal development and really asking yourself that question every day. Am I being better? Am I getting better at life? If you're not willing to ask yourself that question every day, how are you willing to ask anybody else that question or expect it from anybody else? If you're not willing to improve yourself, and let me just tell you, I just want to back up for a second. I really don't think any of the owners were asking themselves that question any day. No, they weren't. They weren't really interested in making themselves better because they thought that they were the best already. They thought that they were perfect and that they didn't do anything wrong. So, but I heard this phrase the other day, and it was this definition, intellectual humility. And when I look back at these partners, they had none of that. And intellectual humility means, you know what? I do have a level of success and experience and knowledge that might be, I have more than you, but it doesn't mean that I'm always right. And it doesn't mean that I always have the answers. You're able to admit when you're wrong. You're also open to new perspectives and new ideas. So I heard that definition the other day and I was listening to something and heard it and I looked it up, and it's when I talk about being an empathetic leader. And being an empathetic leader doesn't necessarily mean you're just listening to everybody's, woes and problems and, whatnot. What it means is that you're able to understand what needs to happen to grow the business. And you're able, the ins and outs of growing a business and the challenges that the business faces, but you also take into consideration the hearts and minds of the people that you lead in your business, the people that you're mentoring every day by being a leader in the business. And when I look back, and we didn't have any of that. So because we didn't have any of that, we had to be that for other people. And we had to be that empathetic leader because, again, we didn't have that. And the team didn't, our teams didn't have that because we each ran an entire team. They didn't have it. And because we had to do that in order to care for the hearts and minds of the people that we managed every day, that we were developing every day, that we were mentoring every day, because we did that, I started to see way back when what bad leadership could really do to an organization, especially when it's magnified times 4, because there were 5 partners. So what we want to do is, as leaders, is remember we need to have that intellectual humility, that we're more concerned with learning new things. And learning new things doesn't mean that you learn a new skill. And I know right now, a lot of leaders and a lot of CEOs are dealing with that imposter syndrome. They're dealing with that self-doubt because you have to learn a lot of new skills that you're not really necessarily trained for. But learning something new means that you might learn something new about somebody that works with you. You might learn something new about yourself. You might look at yourself and say, how do I really see myself? But also, how do other people, how am I when someone's watching me speak? Or when I'm in a meeting and I'm guiding something, how are people perceiving what I'm saying? And looking at that and saying, how can I deliver it better? How can I be a better leader? How can I guide them better? How can I teach them more? Those are more likely the things that you're going to learn on every single day. You're not going to have all of the answers. But what happens is, and I believe this to be so very true with those 5 partners that I worked for, those 5 business owners, is that they had a lot of self-doubt. They had a lot of self-doubt and they had a lot of imposter syndrome, and they were extremely self-conscious. Because what I know to be true now is that when you are a micromanager, when you are a dictator, when you are a control master, what is underneath that is a level of fear. And it just manifests itself as procrastination. It manifests itself as being a dictator, because if you are the control master or you take credit for everything or you are micromanaging, then you don't have to, then no one will see that you really don't know what the heck you're doing, right? So they hired a business coach to fix the friction and fix the challenges and fix the problems in the organization. And it backfired. And it backfired because they weren't willing to see it in themselves first. They wanted to hire this person to fix us, but we didn't need to be fixed necessarily the way that they saw it. So if you are a leader and you're like, or even if you're in an organization, you're like, holy crap, this is really resonating with me because that's what we deal with. I just want to tell you, I want to give you 4 things to think about. Number 1 is because self-doubt's always there. There's always going to be some kind of doubt. There's always going to be some kind of fear. It doesn't go away. The higher you go in the ladder, in the leadership ladder, the bigger your business grows, the more you take on, those problems don't go away. They get bigger. The fear doesn't go away. It manifests itself in different ways. As my writing coach said to me, that fear, that critic doesn't ever go away. It's always there. What it requires us is how do we dance with it? How do we ask it questions? How do we learn more about it? How do we embrace it so that we can be the change, so we can silence it? So instead of, because I do get this a lot where people are like, it's their fault. It's the economy's fault. It's the president's fault. It's the government's fault. It's this person's fault. It's that person's fault. It's, this happened in my business and we didn't grow. We wanted to grow 20% and we only grew 10%. And that was because X, Y, Z, and so on. Instead of that, we can look at ourselves and we can learn how to dance with it. We can learn how to have change start with us by understanding who we are, understanding who we are and how we show up every day. Ask the question every day, am I getting better at life? Am I getting better at being the best version of me? Am I summoning the best version of me every single day? So 4 things to think about. Number 1 is, especially this year, and I think I'm going to do a separate podcast on this, let go of what is weighing you down, even if it's you. Even if it's you, be the change that your business needs. Be the change that your vision needs. Constantly want to learn something new about yourself, about something that, uncovering something. If you feel like if you feel like something is weighing you down, more than likely it is. If you feel like you're stuck somewhere, you probably are. And it's probably from something that you need to let go of. So let go of what's weighing you down. No different than when a rocket lets go of its boosters, to let that weight go so it can soar. Because the more that we realize that change starts with us, the better we're able to lead, the more we're able to enjoy our day, enjoy our life, enjoy our time, and the more we're able to really help our teams do the same. So the second one is focus on developing those next level leaders. Those next level leaders, you constantly want to be developing them and grow and helping them to grow, talking to them, having that conscious dialogue where you're getting an understanding as to where they're stuck, where are they frustrated, and what can you do to help them. Constantly developing those next level leaders so you don't make the same mistakes in leadership that they made back in 2009 when I had to deal with that crazy business coach, right? It's not about you as a leader. It's about if you're willing to lead yourself to a certain place and then what you're willing to do to help others get there too. So really, develop those next level leaders, identify who they are, and really take care of them. Because at the end of the day, you want to surround yourself with good people. And the more you surround yourself with good people, the more you're all able to rise. Number 3 is have a vision beyond your product or service. It's not just about the products that you sell or the service that you provide. It's about the people. It's about the substance found within your business. And the people and the substance and that energy starts with you as the leader, as the CEO, as the person who is a director or a manager or whatever. It starts with you. If your team has bad energy, if they're not productive, if they're not doing the things that they need to do, if your operational procedures are broken or are not working right, you have to ask yourself, am I doing the things that I need to do to make sure that everybody is able to get their job done? Am I taking time to train my people? Am I taking the time to really help them to understand what their strengths are, but also to really align what the business needs with those strengths? Am I helping them to work through things that they might not know or where they're falling short on things? Am I able to help them with that? Am I doing it? So if you get that right, if you get the people right, if you get the substance right, and you work on the structure of your business, the people fill the structure with substance, with energy, with joy, with happiness, with motivation, with momentum, all of that stuff. The product and the service is secondary. Like that will come. So when we're able to have that vision and we're able to communicate it too and say, this is the future that we want to create with what we do. And I need each one of you there to do it. I can't do it myself. When we have that vision beyond, anything's possible. And the last one is believe in something bigger than you. When failures happen and things don't go quite the way that you want it to, it's not blame on somebody else or something whatever. It's because something bigger than us wants to course correct, wants to take us down a different road, wants to detour us. And that's where we need to listen. We need to listen. We need to really look at it and say, okay, what can we do better? I had a conversation with a client yesterday about debrief meetings. And they said, well, we have one once a year and we kind of just do it like in the doorway, like when we're talking to each other. Those debrief meetings have gold. That's where we can learn. We can really learn, okay, how can we do things better? We can learn, maybe we shouldn't do this, but we can also listen to what people have to say and trust that intuition, that inner knowing from something beyond us who's trying to guide us in a better direction. But we need to be willing to do that. When we have an imposter syndrome, when we have self-doubt, when we're not willing to be the change that our organization needs, we're not going to do any of that. Just like the people that I worked for, they didn't do any of that. They didn't let go of what was weighing them down. They would hold on, they would procrastinate on solving problems and dealing with people. And like I said, to even like understanding like who they were inside, they procrastinated on all of that. They did not have a vision other than we want to get to 200 million because that's going to make more money. It's going to bring more money into our pocket. How are we going to do that? Well, let's buy this person or let's buy that person and I will save you all from some of the other conversations they used to have, but they didn't have a vision beyond where they currently were. They didn't have a vision beyond like top line revenue and making more money. They didn't develop any next level leaders. We did our own development, which in hindsight was probably the best thing because it really taught me what a good leader really needs to do. It was the beginning of what a good leader really needs to do and when a good leader does that, how we can really make a difference in this world. And at the time, we made a difference in the industry. I made a difference in the industry. And the last one is they really did not believe in something bigger than themselves. They just believed that they had all the answers and that they were still popular in high school and that they were still like, I mean, we had an air about us when we would walk in, like the business itself. If you were known to be an employee of the business, there was an air about you that you thought you were like the best, not in a good way. So anyway, I hope that this helped you. Like I said, it was my lesson in what bad leadership really looked like from a variety of different views. But also, it was my lesson to really understand what my strengths were, but also what I needed to do then to be a good leader, that really conscious leader, that aware leader, so that I could start to repair a culture that was broken. Now, I only got it so far, and then we ended up leaving in 2014. But while we were there, we made sure to be the change. And we also made sure to make a difference in the lives, in the hearts and minds and lives of the people that we worked with. So I hope that this episode helped you. And until next week, I hope you have a great rest of your week. Hey there. Thank you so much for listening. If you found value on this show, please follow the podcast so you never, ever miss an episode. And I would love, love, love if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for me. Even better, share the show with a fellow business owner ready to step fully into their CEO leadership role. Because right now, more than ever, the world really needs next level leaders. And by the way, did you know you can text me all your questions and get real-time feedback? You absolutely can. Just text the word CEO to me at 610-215-2838 to get connected. One last goodie for you before I go. If you're ready to scale your business and have a co-creator working right by your side, my C-Suite Mentor Program may be perfect for you and your possible new second in command. Just visit thecsuitementor.com to get started.